Hello, everyone. Here's a quick breakdown on how you might map out your social network, a second method. This method, there's two ways to do this. You can do this very roughly by hand. It gets fairly cumbersome if you start to map out too many people. Or you could use a piece of software called EgoNet that is freely downloadable from the web. I'll provide the link to that on the course website. And then you just have to sit there and input data. It is a pretty cumbersome platform. It's kind of it feels like a command line type of interface. The graphic user interface is not strong, but it's free and it does work. So if you're interested in mapping out your social network, that is another good resource. So very briefly, let's go through how you would do this and what types of things you would think about in terms of mapping out your social network. This might be useful to you if you're thinking of going on a job search or you're planning your job search. It might help you to understand the distribution of your resources, where opportunities might lie, and where you might fill in some gaps, so the types of ways in which you want to build and actively cultivate a social network. So first, steps in determining your social network. You can do this. Take a scrap piece of paper, list 10 to 15 people who you either learn from or mentor, people that you know, people that have information or resources. Now, I have put here learn from or mentor, but you can change that to anything, right? So people who you go to for information, people who you go to for advice, people who have have jobs, who might have access to jobs. It can be anything that links you to people, any characteristic or category of relationship. Then you list these 15 people and you ask the question, do these people know one another? If so, how well? So you'll end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Now, I've done this by hand so that you can get a sense of how you might do it by hand. I've listed 6 people. I know that in the previous page I said that you can list 10 to 15. You certainly can. It does become quite cumbersome as you get to more and more people. And it becomes more difficult to map by hand. So I've given you an example of 6 here as a way of understanding this. So I've listed only the first set of relationships here. I've listed Tom, Phil, Amir, Teresa, Tanya, Natalie. And then I've said the relationship between Tom and Phil, they don't really know each other. It's a 1. Between Tom and Amir, it's a 3. Between Tom and Teresa, it's a 4, and so on and so on. And then when I map it out, I would map out myself and my connections to these individuals. So I've also ranked my connections to these individuals and then their connections to one another. So I've done Tom's connections in this particular, in this grouping here. You can see that Phil and Tom I've put close together. So I've used 1 to mean tightly linked, right? So this is how you might map it out, and you layer it on with each individual using the length of the line to indicate the strength of the connection between those individuals. And then you get a sense of where you lie within a social network and where there are clusters. So it looks like Tom, Amir, Phil, and Natalie are all connected. They are all a cluster. And Tanya and possibly Teresa, or maybe even Natalie, yeah, are on the outside here because they have one connection to you and maybe one connection to other people. So they might be sources of unique information. And you can start to look at these types of mappings to hold meaning. Now, if you want to do this in a more sophisticated way, you can certainly go to EgoNet and type in all of your all of your relationships. In that case, you would have names here on the chart, and you'll start to see again where you have clustering, where you have overlapping, where you have unique information, and so on. So some of the things to think about in terms of why we use this method. You can go up to 30 alters or others or relationships, and we know that beyond that, we're not actually getting much more information. So there are other ways of doing social network analysis where you might use hundreds of individuals, but you're not really getting rich information. You start to get a plateau at about 25. And again, you can collect all kinds of information about these individuals depending on what it is your question you're asking, what it is you're interested in. You can collect information on sex, on race, on how you know the individual, how often you speak, how often you seek advice. And then you can be very specific about how you measure it. not in the past year, less than once a month, once a week, multiple times a day or a week, so on and so on. So you can use different questions and different anchors on the scale in order to determine what those lines mean. And then the relationships among alters. Each alter pairing is to be related on a scale ranging from very close to they've never met. So you also have to look at the relationship between alters, and that will help to give you your structure. So I encourage you to play around with this. You can look back at the example and look to the EgoNet website to get more detail, and hopefully you have some fun constructing your social networks and understanding a little bit more about where you fit in among the other people in your world. Take care and have a good day.